In Hungary's capital, Budapest, tens of thousands of people marched in support of the government on Saturday in a so-called peace march. It comes as elections loom large 8 days away. One supporter said the government did lots of good things in the last 4 years, so we stand behind them and we want them to continue for the good of our children. Euronews correspondent in Budapest says that in Hungary, the last weekend before the election is always about huge events by the political parties. And here, where the pro-government peace march is passing right now, the left-wing opposition will hold its rally on Sunday. The crowds gathered in Heroes Square at the end of the march to listen to Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. We came here today to tell each other, to tell the country, and to tell the whole world. We ask for 4 more years. 4 more years. In power since 2010, Orbán's party, the Fidesz, is tipped as the favourite to win.
France's new Prime Minister is disliked by those to the left, but he does well in opinion polls. Valls proved popular as Interior Minister, setting himself up as tough on crime and anti-Roma. He supported the controversial expulsion of the Roma from French cities, drawing comparisons to former right-wing President Nicolas Sarkozy.
France's new Prime Minister has been compared to former British Prime Minister. France's new Prime Minister has been compared to former British. France's new Prime Minister has been compared to former British Prime Minister Tony Blair for both his style and for being to the right of the Socialist Party. Manuel Valls is disliked by those to the left, but does well in opinion polls. He proved popular as Interior Minister, setting himself up as tough on crime and anti-Roma, supporting the controversial expulsion of the Roma from French cities. In a TV interview he said because many of them don't work, so they need to be sent back home. When asked again if he'd send them back home, he said yes, of course. He's spoken out against anti-Semitism and is seen as a breath of fresh air. One supporter said, he seems to be more convincing, he believes in what he says, and I think he believes in a France with more justice. Maybe he represents the real values. In any case, there's hope. The 51-year-old harbours presidential ambitions. He hoped to run as a socialist candidate in 2011, but was beaten by Hollande. Born in Barcelona, he was the mayor of Évry, a town in the Paris suburbs. He and his wife make a glamorous couple. She's a professional violinist.
Thousands gathered in Kiev's Independence Square on Sunday in memory of the dozen of protesters killed 40 days earlier during an anti-government demonstration. Head of administration in Kiev, Volodymyr Bondarenko, has pledged to create a permanent memorial to the victims.
Thousands gathered in Kiev's Independence Square. Thousands gathered in Kiev's Independence Square on Sunday in memory of the dozens of protesters killed 40 days ago during an anti-government demonstration. Many were shot by snipers. It's unclear who issued the command to open fire. Kiev's administrator has pledged to create a permanent memorial to the victims. The city authority will take all measures to keep the memory of this day alive, he said. After discussions with architects and according to public opinion, the decision has been taken to create a huge memorial in Kiev. It must stay here for a long time. This process has already started. It's a phenomenon that will never end. I think the dead are saints, said this Kiev resident. They're called the Heavenly 100. We'll be grateful to them until the end of our lives for fighting for our justice and freedom. Emotions were running high on Sunday. Photos of those killed could be seen around the square, while family and friends laid flowers and lit candles in commemoration.
Spanish journalists held hostage in Syria since September are back in Madrid after being freed and handed over to the Turkish military. Javier Espinosa and Ricardo Garcia Villanova were seized by Al-Qaeda-linked rebels as they tried to leave the country after 2 weeks covering the conflict.
2 Spanish journalists held hostage in Syria since September have been freed and handed over to the Turkish military. Javier Espinosa and Ricardo Garcia Villanova were seized by Al-Qaeda-linked rebels. Espinosa, who's the Middle East correspondent for El Mundo, called the newsroom to let them know the men were safe and in good health. El Mundo's deputy chief said it was Javier as he always was and absolutely calm, and at the same time we were all clapping and cheering and crying. The kidnapping had been kept quiet until December, while negotiations with the rebels took place. They gave us proof that they were alive, and from there negotiations were essentially focused on proving to this group that Javier and Ricardo are journalists doing a journalistic job and that they weren't spies. The 2 men are among scores of journalists believed to have been kidnapped or killed by rebel fighters in Syria since the start of the civil war in 2011.
Greece's government secured enough votes in parliament after midnight on Sunday to pass a key reform bill ensuring further bailout loans to avoid default. However, the session was fraught with tension, with a further dwindling of the government's slim majority.
Greece's government secured enough votes in parliament after midnight. Greece's government secured enough votes in parliament after midnight. Greece's government secured enough votes in parliament after midnight on Sunday to pass a key reform bill ensuring further bailout loans to avoid default. However, the session was fraught with tension, with a further dwindling of the government's slim majority. Nikitas Kaklamanis, a member of the ruling New Democracy Party, was expelled for voting against one of the articles in the bill. Ex-Premier George Papandreou did likewise. He has not suffered the same fate from PASOK. Greece's government now has only a majority of 152 in the 300-seat parliament. While the voting was going on, outside there were more protests against the reform measures being passed by MPs. Despite the bill including a €527 million windfall to be spent on poor, austerity-hit Greeks, the mood on the streets remained highly critical of the government.
North and South Korea military activities are always a source of tensions, but an exercise on Monday ordered by North Korea's Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un has ended in an exchange of artillery fire with South Korea.
Its military activities are always a source of tension. Its military activities are always a source of tension, but an exercise today ordered by North Korea's Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un has ended in an exchange of artillery fire with South Korea. The South says it returned fire after North Korean shells crossed the disputed western maritime border and landed in its territorial waters. South Korean islanders living nearby fled to bomb shelters. Pyongyang had notified Seoul that drills were imminent and warned shipping to avoid the area. The border drawn up at the end of the Korean War is not recognized by the North, and there have been deadly clashes in the past. Amid annual joint military exercises between South Korean and American forces, Pyongyang's been flexing its military muscle in recent weeks to demonstrate its anger.
Experts from the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change meeting in Japan says the health, economic prospects and food and water sources of billions of people are at stake.
Severe, pervasive and severe, pervasive and irreversible, words used in a new UN report about the likely impact of global warming. Amid extreme weather worldwide, experts meeting in Japan say the health, economic prospects and food and water sources of billions of people are at stake.
When you look at the key findings of the report, one of the most important findings is that we're not in an era where climate change is some kind of a future hypothetical. We live in a world where impacts of climate changes that have already occurred are widespread and consequential. We see impacts from the equators to the poles and from the coast to the mountains. There's no question that we live in a world that's already altered by climate change.
An earlier assessment raised the probability that humans are responsible for global warming, thought to cause everything from droughts to rising sea levels. The UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says the time for action is now. It's hoping the world's politicians are listening.
The United States' highest court has ordered Japan to stop whaling in the Antarctic. Tokyo had long claimed that it was for scientific research and in simple reply sold the meat afterwards as a byproduct. Australia successfully challenged this at The Hague, saying it was commercial whaling in disguise. You watch the Marmara television with the news of the week. See you at the next bulletin.